So in the upcoming Space Marine Codex, the number of datasheets is dropping drastically. We're going down from 123 all the way down to 93, so let's take a look at what's going away and why. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought it would be interesting to take a look at Space Marine datasheets, and in particular focus on the datasheets that are going to be removed in the new Space Marine Codex, making a slightly more slimmed down version of the big tome than we've had in the massive index. In amongst all the Space Marine model reveals from earlier in the week, basically Games Workshop teased a huge unit call for the Astartes. Looks like this really will be a reckoning for the Firstborn models, and might well touch a few more miniatures than people maybe realise. When Index Space Marines came out, there weren't really all that many datasheet losses. A few things went away, like say the Venerable Dreadnought and Veteran Intercessors, but if anything a surprising amount actually wound up staying, including a whole bunch of things that I did think there was a fair chance that they would go. When dropping down from 123 datasheets all the way down to 93 in the new book, it basically means that we're losing a third of the Space Marine datasheets, or effectively around about a quarter of the ones that are available in the index at the moment, though a few of them will be character variations. Some of them are fairly obvious ones that will be removed, maybe a few of them are a little bit more questionable as to whether or not they'll make it into the book or survive this rules update pass for various different reasons. Broadly speaking, I strongly suspect that the removed units will reflect things that Games Workshop no longer sells. They have been fairly strict with their no model, no rules policy, going from late 9th edition into early 10th, and there are really quite a lot of Firstborn miniatures that aren't produced anymore, either from that recent cull that they had, or various special characters that got phased out over the last year or so. Obviously, big swaths of removed units aren't exactly great for many people's collections, particularly if you had a bunch of these already. And I think maybe it's particularly painful if you get miniatures sent to Legends or just with no rule support, stuff with no direct replacement in the more current version of the game. Obviously, this is pretty painful for anyone who had those miniatures, though I do feel like a cull was going to come at some point. The Space Marine range is enormous, and Primaris Space Marines are effectively them updating the range. In spite of what Games Workshop has been saying over the past few months or so, the Firstborn range does seem to be on borrowed time. And I feel like the end point of having a slightly more slimmed down Space Marine Codex might not be the worst thing in the world, though obviously it's going to be pretty painful for anyone who was heavily invested in these units in particular and had them as core parts of their army. First up, perhaps some of the most obvious index units that are unlikely to make it into the Codex are all the things that they recently announced were going away when they had their big removal of Firstborn units and things that would no longer be supported. For Firstborn vehicles, we've got the Hunter and Stalker, the Landspeeder and the Tornado and Typhoon variants, the Landspeeder Storm Transport for the Scouts, the Ironclad Dreadnought and Thunderfire Cannon, and for a collection of bikers we've got the Bike Squad Scout bikes and attack bikes. I'd guess that the vast majority of these will probably go to Legends, as they don't really have a direct replacement unit. Perhaps bikes aren't really all that far off Outriders, and attack bikes are somewhat similar to ATVs, but they maybe feel like a bit of a stretch. I'm certainly not thrilled about my bike squads, attack bikes, and land speeders in particular going the way of Legends, though I do feel like in gameplay most of these were perhaps a little bit more peripheral in 9th edition than previous. Perhaps some more interesting units to the Space Marines competitively at the moment. The standard land speeder was alright for spotting for blast weapons. The Thunderfire Cannon could be kind of niche for slowing down key units, could be quite good in certain matchups, but I feel like a lot of the rest was perhaps a little bit underpowered. Perhaps more of a question with things going to Legends is whether or not the Contempt Dreadnought and the Relic Terminators will survive into the new Codex. I've not counted them yet, but I think it's definitely a possibility. Games Workshop's been going around and making all of the rest of the nice new Horus Heresy range into Legends units that you can't field in contemporary 40k. Things like the Leviathan Dreadnought and all the various Heresy era tank configurations, they're all going away basically. I think these two are in a slightly different category to the rest of those, given that they've been part of the core Space Marine Codex for a while now, but it's not really any guarantee that it's going to continue like that, particularly as both of these have been reboxed for the new Heresy range and don't really seem to be very aimed at 40k. The Contemptor Dreadnought might not make a lot of sense to have rules maintained in the same way, given that the Contemptor Dreadnought kit that you get at the moment isn't just locked to those two weapon options that you had before, the Assault Cannon and the Multi-Melter. So I guess if that were to be remained and represented, then we'd have to regain the weapon options. I feel like that just seems a bit unlikely at this point. For the Terminators, I guess it's still the same models being sold, which makes them a little bit more likely to survive if anything. I guess we'll have to watch this space and see whether they make it in, though I guess at least you could proxy them as regular Terminators if you'd like to. I feel like most of the war gear will be able to pass somewhat, though a few of them might have a little bit less flexibility, like say being able to swap out with lightning claws and things. Otherwise, besides that, with the latest reveal stuff, there's a few things that have been replaced or partly replaced. As I very much suspected when the Assault Squad went away, it got replaced by Jump Pack Intercessors, though it does still look like we might well be losing one model option with that, while the Assault Squad's been traded out for them, we'd lose the on-foot version of the Assault Squad, which in fairness maybe wasn't a million miles away from Assault Intercessors anyway, just some slightly different war gear. It's kind of similar for the Scout Squad as well. They were entirely replaced by new models that have similar sort of war gear to the previous ones, but it does look like they haven't done an extra kit for an entire squad of scouts with sniper rifles. There appears to just be the one in the kit, unless Games Workshop haven't properly told us what's going on with them, so I guess the scout sniper squad would go away as well. I feel like as units go, that's really quite a competitively relevant one. They were really quite nice for deployment options that were fairly tough with their 2 wounds now, and also had that really quite cool special rule to be able to not allow them to be shot from long distances. Otherwise, for replace stuff, I suppose the Firstborn Command Squad would trade out 1-to-1 with this Heroes of the Chapter Squad for the Primaris. Slight differences in war gear and no Apothecary in this one, but you still have an Ancient and Champion. With this one, the biggest question might be whether or not this is now the way that you fill the Primaris Champion model. He's only just gained an independent datasheet in the index, but his model still isn't on sale anymore, and I feel like he's going to be still at risk of not having proper rule support if Games Workshop doesn't sell his miniature individually. Finally, we do also have a fair few Firstborn characters that do have direct replacements. The Jump Pack Captain got replaced by a Primaris version. I guess that will be a 1-to-1 trade out. We've had similar things for Terminator Captain, Chaplain, and Librarian, all of which are Firstborn miniatures that are no longer on sale, but now we'll have an updated miniature with a new scale. Talking of characters though, another heavy area that's likely to see a lot of cuts are the Firstborn generic and special characters. We'll start with the generic ones. Over the past couple of miniature phase outs, it seems that Games Workshop has basically purged just about every Firstborn character from the HQ lineup of the Space Marine Codex. On their web store, there's no longer a standard Space Marine captain there, nor is there a bike captain, although he's been kind of dubious for a while now. There's no regular lieutenant or jump pack lieutenant, the same for the Librarian and Jump Pack Librarian. The Jump Pack versions were made with an upgrade kit, I believe, for those ones where you could buy some Jump Packs separately. The Tech Marine and Servitor kit has gone, so that's 2 datasheets lost there for the Firstborn Tech Marine and the Servitor squad to back him up. And then there's a few more cases that are perhaps a little bit more interesting. Firstly, while they've purged most of the range, it seems that both the regular Firstborn Chaplain and the Jump Pack Chaplain are still on sale. It looks like the Firstborn Chaplain just remains still fully up for sale as a reasonably recent plastic miniature that you can see here. And the Jump Pack Chaplain as well has a model for the Blood Angels that I think is really quite cool with an Inferno pistol. And seeing as that one's never had a specific datasheet for Codex or Index Blood Angels before, there's at least a reasonable hope that that might stay for now. I feel like that one would be kind of a shame if they did retire it, as it's just such a nice sculpt. Another more interesting question is whether or not there'll still be a datasheet for the Ancient and Terminator armor, so that's Terminator guy with a banner basically. Again, he's an interesting one that seems to have maybe been kept around because of the Blood Angels. You can build a Terminator with a great big banner from their unique Assault Squad type kit. Again, the existence of that miniature might have been enough to save him and keep him in the Codex, but it's not impossible that he could still be gone as well, seeing as he's a different scale to the rest of the Terminators, or even just be made into a unique Blood Angels datasheet. Finally, beyond the generic characters, we also have the Firstborn special characters. I've also lumped in the Ultramarines unique Tyrannic War Veterans as well, as they're chapter specific too. A few of these are ones that I was actually kind of surprised that they actually bothered including in the index in the first place, given that they've been out of print for a while now. There's a couple of the Ultramarines unique sergeants in Sergeant Telion and Sergeant Cronus. I think they're both highly likely to just either be legends or gone. I suppose Telion will probably need an updated model to fit in with the new scale scouts if they were to keep him around. Otherwise, the Tyrannic War Veterans with their slightly oddball datasheet, they've gone away as well. Dynath Lysander of the Imperial Fist has had his model removed for a while, as has Pedro Cantor. I feel like both of those would thoroughly be deserving of a new updated miniature sculpt at some point in the future, perhaps particularly Pedro Cantor, as the Crimson Fists don't have any other characters at the moment. Out of the fully removed miniatures, perhaps another interesting one is Cato Sicarius. I feel like he's had at least a reasonable chance that he might get a Primaris model at some point in the future, given that we saw him in some artwork a while back with some new armour. With Games Workshop loving their Ultramarines so much, I could easily see a release for him at some point. Unless they pull any surprises on us though, it looks like it's not materialised for the 9th edition Space Marine Codex. Otherwise though, out of the special character list, both in the web store and in the Index Space Marines, there's a few other more interesting ones. Chaplain Cassius of the Ultramarines is maybe a bit more half-half. He currently only has his Death Watch miniature on sale and has done for a while now. That's probably a bit of a different case to most other things, as they do sell him, but only sell him in the box alongside his Kill Team Cassius. It's definitely not impossible that they could just consider him part of that unit now, and no longer allow him to be fielded by Ultramarines. Vulcan Hestan is another interesting one in that he's the only firstborn fine cast resin character still on sale currently, I believe. Pretty much everything else has been removed from the web store one by one, the likes of Lysander and Pedro Cantor, and out of the core Codex Space Marines, so not the more divergent chapters, I think that he's the last one left. Again, might just be enough to save him, but he very much feels in the category of the other old guard. Will be sad to see him go away really. He's really quite an iconic character with his Salamander's relics that he carries around and goes hunting for. Finally, I did think that on Games Workshop's web store there's at least a small chance that we might get rules for Captain Messinius of the White Consuls. He was one of the Black Library miniatures originally, I believe. A Primaris captain with a plasma pistol and power fist. He doesn't really necessarily need a new datasheet or anything, given that he could just be represented by the standard Primaris captain, I suppose. But given that he is a current named character on sale in their web store, again, they could decide to give him some rules if they wanted to. Can't help but think it would feel a bit of a shame for him to have rules and Pedro Cantor not to have them though. I feel like he's probably not going to be on the priority list for most people anywhere near as high. Finally, besides all the devastation that's happening to Firstborn, there's also a fair few options within the Primaris line they could potentially consolidate, not necessarily having the models being made unplayable, but just merged with a different datasheet. I feel like all of them are fairly low likelihood, but there's at least the chance that these could get merged. The Combi Weapon Lieutenant could just get rolled into the Phobos Lieutenant datasheet. Currently, I feel like he's got some funky lone operative type special rules to make a fairly basic lieutenant with a combi weapon have something different. I think it is quite a fun rule set, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it goes away at some point. Otherwise, the Blade Guard Ancient, I feel at least has the possibility of being merged with the regular Ancient and just counting as a fancy looking one of them at some point. Probably a fair bit less likely this time though, seeing as he's survived the redo from the Codex to the Index, but I think it's still possible. As mentioned, the Primaris Champion has only had a datasheet very recently, and now the only way to buy him will be alongside the Heroes of the Chapter box set. It does mean that he could potentially just wind up in that squad. And I guess finally, theoretically, there could be several tank variants that you could merge the datasheets for. Say for example the Gladiator tanks or the Storm Speeder loadouts. But given that 10th edition has established them with their own different special rules and things, I think that that's kind of unlikely. Just to wrap up though, here are just the rough totals of the different categories of datasheet that I think are most likely to go away. For the directly removed vehicles and bikes, that'll be 11 of them. 2 datasheets go away from the updated kit variants. It looks like there's at least 8 different generic characters going and 6 different special ones, which should give us a total of 27, a little bit off the 30 total that Games Workshop seem to have promised are going. Otherwise, I feel like the remaining few are probably going to be on this list somewhere. The Contemptor Dreadnought and the Relic Terminators I feel like perhaps are some of the most likely. Otherwise, I feel like it's probably going to be some of the other characters that are still on sale, things like the Terminator Ancient, Chaplain and Jump Pack Captain, Vulcan Hestan, and Chaplain Cassius. It looks like by the numbers some of those are going to survive and some of them aren't. In any case though, let me know your thoughts. Which of the datasheets do you think are going to make it into Codex Space Marines and which ones are going to get left by the wayside? Feel free to let me know any other possibilities that I've not thought about as well. I guess there might be one or two in a codex of so many datasheets. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. I'll certainly aim to review the Space Marine Codex in full once it's out as well. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics has a Patreon page as well. That's what allows me to keep on making videos quite so regularly, so if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.